Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Mooney, and I am Head of Catch Technical Services. I would like to welcome you all to the first of Catch Technical Services webinars, which today is being presented by Catch Technical Consultant Lorraine Braben. I am also very pleased to welcome Matthew Lorry from the Energy Institute, who will be presenting a case study of the hearts and minds, tools and techniques being implemented in real life. Welcome to Lorraine. Lorraine is a chartered human factors practitioner, a chartered chemical engineer, a qualified HR professional, as well as being an engineer, which is quite unusual. Yes, and Lorraine has 30 years experience in the process industry, so she knows what she's talking about, in other words. Our second speaker today is Matthew Lorry. Matthew is a chartered psychologist, again, varied background over the last 10, 20, 30 years, whatever that may be. Attended the University of Manchester, is a chartered member of the BPS. He was part of the implementation team at the Shell Hearts and Minds programme. He's also worked at BP implementing their safety cultural programme in the years 2004 to 2012. And now, as I say, he works for the Energy Institute, is an independent consultant and trainer since 2012. Before we move on, I would just like to say a few words about Catch Technical. Catch Technical is a new offering within the Catch family. We were launched last year during 2019. We are a specialist team of expert consultants brought together by Catch. Our consultants can work individually on a specific project or collaboratively to manage and deliver a complex program of work. So why should you choose Catch Technical? We are diverse with a range of consultants of various disciplines. We have over 250 plus years of experience, and our consultants are well versed in working across a number of different sectors, bringing skills, ideas, and new ways of working to your project brief. We are consistent. Our small team ensures that you know who you'll be working with all the way through your project. We are trustworthy. Catch has been supporting the industry for over 20 years. We only work with reputable consultants and consultancies with solid experience. We are also able to offer on-site and off-site training, such as the webinar today, and to work through Catch Skills, delivering other training packages, besides, of course, delivery of consultancy to your business.
Okay.
So I'll now hand over to Lorraine. Thank you very much, Lorraine.
Right, thanks, Jill. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so today's webinar is really about understanding the Hearts and Minds toolkit with regard to improving safety culture. So the agenda today is very much about giving an overview. It's an introduction, and we're going to try and answer the following questions. So what's the HSE perspective about safety culture? What do we actually mean by culture? How can we go about changing it? And then where does the Hearts and Minds toolkit fit into that process? What resources are available to us? Okay, so as Jill said, if you have any questions, please flag up in the chat box. Just again, bear with me as I came out of sharing my screen. I just need to set something else up as well, and I've lost it. Yeah. Okay, just so I can see those questions come through. Thank you. So we'll start with HSE's perspective on culture. Why am I not moving forward? Okay, sorry about that. So safety culture, the HSE perspective. As Jill said, I'm a human factors consultant, and the HSE have been very have been pushing the human factors agenda, particularly with the coma sites, for a number of years now. And so human factors is all about that human interaction, particularly with safety. So it's a good blend of engineering, psychology and people management. So safety culture sort of fits under that agenda. The website link that you can see there links neatly through to the human factors topics on the HSC's website, and they've got a whole section under culture. So the HSC talk about the top 10 for human factors, and you can see at the side here the common topics that which gives a bit of a background as to what the HSC are looking for. And when they're visiting your site, they will be on the lookout for the type of signals that suggest that your culture might not be where it wants to be. So things like widespread routine procedural violations, failures within compliance with your safety management system, and decisions that suggest that safety is not a priority. So we know that they'll be on the ball around this. And for those people who work at coma sites, safety culture would come under the human factors section of your safety report, and there would be a good practice to include that to some level in your write-up. So what do we actually mean by culture? Well, safety culture, or culture in general, it's the way we do things around here. And I really like this next quote. It's what we do when nobody is watching us. It buys into that idea of the underlying beliefs, assumptions, values, and our behaviours that contribute to that whole environment of an organisation. So it includes our vision, our systems, symbols, the language, the habits, etc. And I really like this cartoon because I think that often the roots of a culture get quite shrouded in the mists of time. We don't quite know why we do things sometimes, and what might have been appropriate at one point in time may no longer be appropriate in the future. So before we get into the idea of change safety culture, I thought it was worthwhile thinking about how we as individuals respond to change. And this is fairly typical. So we know that our confidence, morale, effectiveness varies over time, okay? And when we're going through a change, what we'll see, at the very first point, we will have be told that a change is going to happen or is necessary. And our immediate response often tends to be denial. It's often accompanied with an increase in our morale about that, because we're confident that we know what we're doing, we know that we are good at what we do, why therefore do we need to change? So that denial is inherent in that immediate response. At that point in time, the type of thing that we need from our management is to provide information. Why is change necessary? What is it about what we're doing at the moment that isn't going to deliver for us for the future? So having got that information, having gone through the stage of denial, we can actually become quite angry. So we realise that the change is coming, but we don't see the point of it. Morale drops, we feel quite resistant to it. And at that point, we need support. We need support to continue to understand that we do need to change, and that it's not about necessarily us as people, it can be about the way the organisation is working. But we reach a real dip in our morale. At this point, everything has been about looking backwards and why should we change when everything has been okay as it is if we don't see that need. But ultimately, we then start to look forwards and start to think, well, maybe this change isn't going to be as bad as we think it is. Start to explore what that might mean for us as individuals. And at this point, really, we're looking for our managers to provide some level of direction, keep us moving in the way in which we need to change rather than going off at different tangents. To the point where we can actually accept that change may be beneficial, and that it's not such a bad thing after all. It's not going to adversely impact us as individuals. And really, at this point, we're just looking for that ongoing encouragement. And it's worth saying that this line should continue to rise so that our confidence, morale, effectiveness actually increases beyond where we were at the beginning. Now, everybody's different. Our responses to change can be different. And the amount of time that we take in each of these phases, and this is a simplified version of the diagram, I should say, but the amount of time that we take to go through that can vary from one person to the next. So somebody could go through the denial and anger stage in a matter of seconds or minutes. Other people can be in that stage for hours, days, weeks, or even months before they can actually start to think about looking for the changes being positive. And I'm sure many of you can think of examples where people don't really get beyond that if they feel that the change hasn't been beneficial to them. So I think it's worth understanding that human psychology around change and our response, because it's inherent about what we're going to talk about later. So we want to change culture. And I think when you look at the slide here, Timkins is never going to actually change culture by having a click of his fingers. You can't just say we're going to change the culture and as of Monday morning it's going to be different. It takes time. So we're going to have a little look at a model around culture change and how that might happen. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to grasp what a culture actually is. So when we think about it, and we go back to the definition that we described earlier, a lot of it was about attitudes, beliefs, values, and the sort of things that people think up here in the minds. And again, that's very tenuous to directly influence that. However, what we can do is start to change behaviours. So behaviours are much more observable and therefore much more measurable. And what we find in psychology is that if we act in a particular way that is fundamentally different to our attitudes and our belief systems, then we get something that's called cognitive dissonance. And we find it very difficult to behave and to keep on behaving in a way that fundamentally disagrees with our beliefs. So what happens is either our behaviour will slip, but that's part of what we're going to look at in a moment, or our attitude will move forward. We'll start to realise that the behavioural change can have something different, and therefore our attitude will change, and that in turn changes the culture. You may get some people who don't make that leap, and because we feel uncomfortable working in a way that doesn't meet our values or our beliefs, then actually they may self-select and leave the organisation. And what that means is that then you're left with people who will buy into that new way of working and move your culture forward. And so how do we influence behaviour? Well, we can influence behaviour in some really concrete ways. So through our systems and processes, by designing our processes that work towards encouraging the right behaviour, we can encourage that behaviour through coaching and mentoring systems. And we can provide targets and objectives that, again, encourage the right behaviour. There is a little bit of a watch out, particularly around targets and objectives. We do need to monitor that we're getting the behaviours that we accept. There are plenty of times where we've set targets, we've made changes, and that behaviour isn't what we expected. And so, therefore, we need to go back and change those targets. But in principle, by working in this area, we can change those behaviours, which in turn allows people to move their attitudes and in turn allows that culture to move forward to where we want it to be. Okay? So why does culture change fail often? We know and we're aware that when we try to make organisational changes, 70% of the time, those changes don't meet their stated goals. And there's a number of reasons why that might be the case. Often it's implemented from the top down. And when change originates from management, employees often feel that they're not involved in creating the plan, they don't have that buy-in to making the plan work, and they don't feel actively engaged with that. Another issue from that top-down approach can be that the vision is unclear. And when vision is unclear, communication can become really confused, particularly as it moves throughout an organisation, because you're reliant on other people, your middle managers, your supervisors, etc., to be explaining it often in the detailed way of what it means for their particular work area. Another key issue is that employees who raise concerns can be labelled as resistors or blockers. And if we don't listen to those people who have concerns, and often those concerns are very genuine and they're being raised with the right motives, we don't actually understand the risks that we're exposing the organisation to. And therefore, when people don't feel that they're being listened to, they don't feel that they have an input, then they don't buy into it. And therefore, although we might have said we've made the change, actually the behaviours don't change fundamentally. Excuse me. So I want to talk about something called organisational drift. And this is a concept that you might see in a number of different contexts now. So we're aware within an organisation that we have our risk factors. We know our underlying hazards that are inherent within our business or within our processes. And so in order to make sure that we operate in a safe way, we design our work with a good margin between our hazards and our work as we think it's being done. So we set up our procedures, we set up our systems, etc. And at the beginning, that's how we start to work. But over time, that work as done starts to drift away from the work as imagined. And our real margin of error actually reduces in real time. So that as time goes on, that work as done deviates further and further to the point where we can have an accident or an incident. Okay? And so what we need to understand, and part of what the Hearts and Minds Toolkit is about, is understanding what really happens as work is done. So a good safety culture places a high value on safety, health and environment, and not only occupational safety, you know, the slips, trips, falls type of safety, but also what's inherent in our business processes or process safety within the chemical process industries. And I know a number of you are not necessarily from that process industry background, but actually the principles are about what's inherent in the way in which we work. And what we're looking for is all of our employees to be alert, to expect the unexpected, and to have a good understanding of what they should do, how they should react when an incident happens, or before that, before they see the sort of cues that suggest that things are not as they should be, when they start to see that work is done deviating away from work as it should be done. We want employees to be open to suggestions and fundamentally believe that their actions are going to make a difference, because without their buy-in, we don't have a positive culture. And in order for employees to behave like that, we need our managers to show genuine leadership. So we're all in this together. So there are a few fundamental points around culture. This is very much a high-level overview. So going to move on to Hearts and Minds Safety Culture. And I think what this does is it ties into those grey circles that we saw in the culture change model. Within the Hearts and Minds process is fundamentally based on this model of safety culture, the safety culture ladder. Underneath this, we might have the criminal layer where we're just working unsafely, and we know we are. However, assuming that we're not at that point, the bottom rung of the ladder is the pathological level. So it's that idea of who cares as long as we don't get caught. We might hear things such as the lawyers or the regulators say I was okay. I've done my bit of safety for the year. Of course we have accidents. It's a dangerous industry. Whoever had the accident is an idiot, and therefore we should sack them. So it's really that people don't inherently care about safety and are only driven by regulatory compliance. As we become increasingly informed, we move up to the reactive level. So we accept that safety is important, and when we have an accident, we do a lot about it. So we might hear things like, well, we're serious, i.e. managers are serious, but why don't our workforce do as they're told? Lots of discussions around how we classify accidents, potentially to try and get our statistics down. And there's still that element of, well, you've got to consider the conditions under which we're working. It's still, a hazardous industry. And although we're taking safety seriously, often it's only after other things have gone wrong. It's not inherently built into the way in which we do our work. As we move up to the next step of the ladder, we move to the calculative step. And I think many people will probably recognise this. This is where we have our HSE safety management systems. We've got lots of procedures, we've got lots of documentation, we do lots of audits, and we collect lots of statistics. So we can see how well we're doing. We're still tending to try and categorise our incidents and move it down. There's a lot of focus on systems and numbers and data. And we're still not quite there. We're still seeing accidents. We're still seeing things going on that are not what we would expect to do. And so we're looking to increase trust and accountability as we go up through this ladder. So we move forward to the proactive level. And this is really about providing ongoing continuous improvement in our safety leadership and values. So our resources are available to fix things before an accident or an incident makes it apparent that they need fixing. We're still pretty fixed on statistics, but we are trying to make our procedures owned by the workforce, allow them to be adapted to the workplace conditions, and we're moving forward into preempting what might happen much more strongly than reviewing what has happened in the past. Ultimately, we would like to get to this generative step in the ladder. So it's just inherent within our culture that HSE, health, safety and the environment, is fundamentally how we do business around here. We're all aware of our own contribution to that. And we have this sense of chronic unease or mindfulness. So we know that safety makes sense. We know it's good business sense. We know it's good for our people. It's embedded within our values. We welcome new ideas. And no matter how good we think we're doing, we're always looking for where it can go wrong. And I think it's that questioning that is fundamental to that generative step on the ladder. So, and I think the other key point with that top part of the ladder is management knows what's really goes on. We really understand that difference between work as done and work as imagined. And that is minimal because we know what's going on and people are open, people can feel trusted and able to flag up when things haven't been done as they should be and be able to talk about the reasons for that without feeling that it's going to result in some sort of disciplinary measure. So that's the safety culture ladder that the Hearts and Minds process is built on. And there's some key features around the process. So I think the first thing to say is it's not a training program, it's a toolkit. And like any toolkit, you've got different tools that do different jobs. So you use the tools that are appropriate to what your own needs are. And the toolkit offers a range of different tools and techniques that are around embedding and improving your safety culture. So you select what is appropriate. The tools are also based on making research and theory accessible. So it's very much grounded in the theory. It's got a lot of background information to it, but actually the tools are all about being useful. And as a result of that, they can be delivered by non-experts. You know, you don't need to have a safety expert. You don't need to have a hearts and minds expert to be able to use it. I would say, as a bit of a proviso, it does require a lot of planning and preparation, but, you know, people are able to do that and the material is available. So the way the process works is very interactive. It's all built around workshops, and it's about getting people to identify their own problems and create their own solutions. So the methodology: start with developing the programme, identify the focus areas that you want to concentrate on. And I think this second point, ensure that you've got leadership support, is absolutely vital, because you need that support from the top to make sure that you've got the resources, the time and the enthusiasm built in to make it happen. And often it can be worse to start a programme and then allow it to lapse because there's no support to keep it going, than to not start at all, because you get people bought in, they can see that this is positive, and then it all just peters out. So that's the biggest watch out, I would say, with this. So knowing that you what areas you want to focus on, knowing that you've got support to move forward, identify which tools may be useful to you, and then each tool is used in this participative workshop context. So the idea is to work in small groups, certainly no more than 20 at a time, and it normally will require 2 to 3 hours without interruption. So if you are working with people, make sure that they've organised their deputies, then they're not going to get pulled out if at all possible. And within the workshops, it's very much about diagnosing, identifying problems and working up solutions, coming up with the possibilities, brainstorming ideas, allowing people to have a say, and then working together to decide which of those solutions are going to be the most workable and which ones you're going to prioritise. And then committing to actions, because things don't change if you don't actually do something about it. And then crucially at the end, following it up. So how are those actions being implemented? Are they delivering the results that you expected? Are they dealing with the problems that you identified? And that might be done by monitoring actions or going back into the workshops and seeing where people are actually at again. So that's the methodology. What I'm going to do now is talk through the individual tools. And I think it's worth just mentioning where the Hearts and Minds toolkit actually came from. So as Jill said, Matthew was involved in the development of the toolkit with Shell back in the early 2000s. So Shell put a lot of investment into developing this tool and rolling it out throughout their whole organisation, and saw significant improvements in their safety culture, and as a result felt that this was a really valuable tool and should be made accessible to a much wider audience. So they engaged with the Energy Institute to be the provider of the Hearts and Minds Safety Culture Toolkit. So the intellectual property remains with Shell, I believe, but at the Energy Institute provide the support to make it happen. So there's a number of tools in the toolkit. The first one, and I'm just going to run through these fairly quickly. So the first one is around understanding your culture, and this effectively is a tool for conducting a safety survey and safety culture survey, I should say, and allowing you to identify the gaps. So this might be the first step in your programme to then allow you to decide which areas you need to focus on. However, as with anything, you may already have that done and you might not need to do this, but it provides a clear view of the culture of your organisation across a set of consistent dimensions. Understanding your energy culture it's very much like the HSE culture tool, but focused on the energy management and greenhouse gas emissions approach. So then we start to get down into some of the details, some of the more fundamental systems. So how do we learn from incidents? And this tool is about the communication process. How do you understand what came out of your investigations? How do you pass that information on to your workforce? And most importantly, how do you get your workforce to actively engage with that learning so they can take it in, which is, again, it's the idea of hearts and minds, so it's embedded in their thought process when they're out in the workplace. And the LFI tool is helping people to make sense of incidents and what it actually means for them as individuals. Making change last is a tool for supporting that process of organisational change. So it links in very much to that idea of the psychology of change and how people need to accept change and actually keep it current. So keeping it sustainable, keeping it front of mind until it becomes embedded as a habit. So that takes you through another process about increasing ownership and commitment to the change. Then we get into managing rule breaking, and this ties in really neatly with the HSC's topic around human factors and human error and managing human error. So this is about explaining why people break the rules and how the different elements and understanding of why people break the rules will help you to address those shortcomings. So it fits as a model of human error, some of which are around inadvertent behaviours, some of which are much more deliberate. And by understanding that model, we can then address the issues that cause people to not follow what we want them to, change that behaviour. Supervision. Well, we know that supervisors are absolutely key to preventing incidents on the shop floor. They're a fundamental layer of protection. And we also know that we get the behaviours that we tolerate, be them safe or unsafe, and supervision is the key that sets that standard. So this tool is very much about providing supervisors with those non-technical skills that help them to supervise effectively. So it sort of lines up with first line manager training and uses some of those sort of practices. Then we have working safely. So this is a framework around the safe behaviour process. So how do we sense what's going on? How do we identify, understand, recognise those hazards in our daily work activities? And how do we then behave in a way that means that we can work safely, make sure that our colleagues work safely as well? Because we can recognise that not all hazards can be completely removed or controlled, and this provides a framework to promote and sustain those safe behaviours. Driving for excellence builds very much on the working safely tool. So it uses the same model, but it's very much around road transport and driving. So it is, as it says, driving for excellence. So it's about helping good drivers become better by changing attitudes of drivers, and not just drivers, but all those people in the background, in the back office, who may also be involved in planning and scheduling driving activities, because we know that road transport is a major hazard that many people, many organisations have to deal with, and often the drivers outside of your organisation are on the public road, so or in your clients' premises. So it's really focused around that. It's quite a focused area, that one. We have the risk assessment matrix. So this tool is about helping to assess risks. It's gives a good appreciation of how we can manage risk assessment and how we can apply the matrix. And again, about appreciating your own role, appreciating your own role within your systems for managing safety. And then the final tool in the toolkit is about situational awareness. And this is a simple technique for recognising hazards on the shop floor, at the workplace, and being able to control them and getting into that habit of identifying and defining ways for maintaining control. So it links quite nicely with some of the dynamic risk assessment approaches that many sites have. So that's a very brief overview of the toolkit. What I'm going to do now is ask Matthew to talk through the case study. So just bear with me and I will mute and Matthew can come in.
Lorraine, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thanks. Visual cue. Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. And thanks to Jill and Catch for inviting me onto this webinar. This is just one example of how a company has used the Hearts and Minds tools. And they used 3 of the tools specifically from the toolkit in 3 different ways. And I think that illustrates the possibilities of how a company can use some of the tools from the Hearts and Minds toolkit. The example comes from the power generation industry. And this is from the renewables sector, so mainly wind power generation. And this is a multinational company operating in America, Europe, and other parts of the world. They usually have small sites, so relatively remote, small locations. Not too many people are working together, so they don't have big sites like an oil refinery, that sort of level. They're usually smaller sites, and as I understand it, even gas-fired power stations run with really quite few people. The reason they started to use the Hearts and Minds tools was they wanted something that would help them with their behavioural safety, with their safety culture, as part of their HSE strategy. So they wanted to implement their strategy, and one of the objectives there was to get to the top of that safety culture ladder. They wanted to strive towards, getting to proactive and generative on that ladder, which Lorraine described earlier. So they chose these 3 tools: understanding your culture, managing rule breaking, and making change last. The first one, understanding your culture, they chose that one to do first, exactly for the reason that Lorraine described it as. They wanted to understand what their culture was like. They hadn't done something like that before. And what they said was that culture assessment, so using a survey like that, was the missing piece in their HSE, in their behavioural safety activities in the company. They've done workshops with over 900 people across 7 countries. There was support in how to do it from the corporate team. But the way they use the tool, and I think this highlights, that people, you don't have to be an expert to use them. The teams at the sites themselves would run the workshops. And the purpose of doing that was to identify actions to improve safety culture at the site and with the people who were based at the site. So they might, that might be their base location. They'll go out to different turbines to do the maintenance work, for example. So the teams themselves identified the actions. Management weren't involved in the workshops. They did provide support. But what management did, I think, speaks to something else that Lorraine was saying about leadership engagement and buy-in. They would follow up. So they would pay attention to and take interest in what things did they identify and how were they getting on in terms of implementing those improvement actions in culture. The next tool they decided to use was the managing rule breaking tool. And they used this quite slightly differently to the culture tool. So with the culture tool, they took it as is. They took it off the shelf and said, right, we're going to use this in our teams, and used it as it's, as it's set up, as it's, the sort of standard implementation method. What they did with the management rule breaking tool was that they adapted it to their purposes. So they took the workshops, they took some of the concepts and ideas and sort of put their own stamp on it in a way. They chose pieces that they were going to use and slightly adapted the process. And they took one of the exercises from the workshop and did it as a pre-workshop exercise before they went to the sites and ran workshops to understand what people saw as the issues with complying with procedures. So that's what the management rule breaking tool is about. What they said was that the real benefit of using this tool was the power of the conversations that weren't usually happening about that gap between work as imagined and work as done. And sometimes it was the first sort of open, honest discussion that they had at sites, which was about the procedures that they had in place and what level of the procedures were, how well were they working. And they said this was different to any other discussion that they had. What managers found the benefit to be was that they got that reality, so they understood the gap between work as imagined and work as done. And the way that the workshop was set up, both prompted by the tool and how they implemented it in that company, in that conversation, it gave an equal voice to the operations and the operators and supervisors about what procedures they had, what made it difficult to comply with them or follow them, and what could be done to improve those things. They said that was unique, that was different, and that was something they hadn't done before. So they adapted that tool to their specific needs. The third tool they've used is the Making Change Last tool. And this one they used even more sort of covertly they really sort of just took concepts from it and adapted them to use. So they sort of embedded this in an existing program that they had, which was in their operational excellence approach. So they had a program of operational excellence. And what they recognized was that that part of engagement and buy-in with people who were involved in that program had not been addressed. So they used that tool and some of the exercises from the workshop to understand, what would make people buy in? What do people see as the perceived benefit of this operational excellence approach? What do they see as the costs? How would this really work? What would be the benefit to me as an individual, to the team, to the wider organization? What might get in the way? What might enable us to implement this? And, they said that the tool was very adaptable and they used it to enable those teams to think, right, if we're going to do operational excellence, what might get in the way? What might the problems be? How do we solve them? And how do the teams create those solutions to make change last? And, really embed that new way of working or the new ways of approaching problems, in a sustainable way. Okay, Lorraine, back to you.
Right, thanks for that, Matthew. That's a good explanation. And I think the case study really sums up one of the things that I like about the toolkit. It's extremely flexible. So, you've got some well-structured programs that you can use, like Matthew said, straight off the shelf, or you can take the principles and apply them. And I think that's really useful because it's all about coming up with something that's going to be workable for your own organisation rather than having to work through a programme which isn't necessarily going to be beneficial or feel that it's being foisted on you. So thanks for that. So hopefully what we've been able to demonstrate this morning is going back to this idea of changing culture, how the Hearts and Minds toolkit fits into these systems here around providing some really concrete activities that allow you to move your culture forward. So through your systems and processes, because it's so participative and interactive, you've got the opportunity for coaching and mentoring with that, and you're developing action plans that the workforce is actually buying into, which is sort of fitting in with this idea of targets and objectives, which you know, we should then start to see a behaviour change, an attitude change, and ultimately the idea of a culture change. So I think that covers, like I say, very high level introduction to the idea of safety culture and the individual tools. But hopefully that's given you an idea of where it fits in and how it might be useful to you. So just lastly, there's a piece about resources. The Hearts and Minds website is available to everybody. You can go onto that link with the Energy Institute, and please have a look at the materials that are available. So there's lots of supporting information available on the website. That's free for anybody to use. The tools themselves do need to be paid for in terms of the actual booklets. So, for example, if you can see that, the actual sort of process. But that again can be purchased from the Energy Institute. I thought it was worth just saying what support we can offer from Catch Technical, and very much like the toolkit, it's about what you may want or need, be it from helping to plan and design the programme that you want, delivering some training on the background principles, facilitating workshops, and often I think having somebody independent to facilitate these workshops can be beneficial rather than it being management or the safety department. But it's really what you want to do. What we are offering is a free telephone consultation to discuss how the Hearts and Minds Toolkit can help you to improve your safety culture. So if you think that that would be beneficial, either contact myself or Jill, and we will set up a call to see where we might be able to support you, and also to point you in the right direction, and you know, what might be helpful to you. So that was what we wanted to cover this morning. I will hand you back to Jill. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorraine. You've all been very quiet. I haven't had any questions come through on chat. So, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask now at this point?
Yeah, Jill, I've had one that has come through, right, which was about the better driving. And Matthew, I might have to ask you if you could answer this one. So, how does the better driving part link into the Driving for Better Leadership report / approach being backed by Highways England? It's not something that I'm particularly familiar with. I think it's something I need to go away and have a look at. I just wondered if you're aware of that, Matthew.
I'm not aware of the document from the Highways Agency, but what I'd say is what the Driving for Excellence tool focuses on is not about competency of drivers. What it does look at is the hearts and minds aspect of driving operations in companies. So it's really for commercial drivers, and it looks at some of the some of the psychology of driving that might have an impact on driver safety. So it could be things like unconscious biases, overestimation of competency. You know, we all think we're a better than average driver, but we're not. It also looks at, how journey management people work with drivers, and, maybe some of those more, invisible things that work there rather than the sort of technical aspects. So that's what it covers, but I wouldn't be able to answer with confidence about how that links to the thing from the Highways Agency, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Jill, it's Richard Smith here. It was me who asked the question.
Oh.
The Driving for Better Leadership report has been targeted at directors of companies because it's not just for the general public. It really has been targeted at directors and companies. So again, that is not just competency. We'll also be looking at hearts and minds. That's why I asked the question.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think, Richard, it's one that we can have a look at.
Yeah, we can definitely have a look
at it. Outside of here.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions around it? What we've been talking about this morning?
Oh, very quiet. Very quiet today.
One question that often comes up, Lorraine, is that people ask, if we use the Hearts and Minds toolkit, do we necessarily have to use all the tools in the toolkit in a certain order or in a structured way? And it's a toolkit, so the way it's set up, the idea behind it is that you choose whichever tool is appropriate for the problem you want to fix or the thing you want to work on. So you can choose whichever tool fits your issue, the challenges that you're facing, to match that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's one of the things it's worth emphasising, is it's very much about enabling you to develop a bespoke programme that's suitable for your own organisation. And I think for those organisations that multinational, the tools are available in other languages. I'm not sure exactly which languages off the top of my head, but different tools are available in other languages as well if you were going to roll it out, beyond the English-speaking population of your organisation.
Is anybody thinking of implementing any of the tools? Have you implemented the tools? Got any feedback for us?
Yeah, I think if anybody's interested in having a look at this, well, a couple of points. First of all, we're going to put the webinar on both the Catch Technical website, and I'll be putting it on my own website. But also, please take up the offer of having a call, even if it's just to explore what might be relevant to you, and for us to point you in the right direction to read up a little bit more about it. We'd be more than happy to do that.
Yep. The recording of today will be placed on the Catch Technical webpage on the Catch website. Also, I'm sure Lorraine will be happy for us to put a copy of the presentation in the same place.
Yeah.
If there's no more questions, then I'd just like to say thank you all for taking part today. Obviously, this is the first of what we hope is many more. We may have had a few technical problems, but what happens? So please keep a lookout for any more webinars. If you would like to request a webinar, if you've got a problem, a project coming up, or an issue you'd like to address and you think we might be able to help you at Catch Technical, then please let me know. Just drop me an email. You will be receiving an email, brief email saying thank you, and also to answer some feedback for us, because obviously in the spirit of continuous improvement, we want to know what we did right and what could be improved upon in future. Some of our consultants have been listening in today, and hopefully they will be giving webinars over the next few weeks. And that's about it, really. So thank you very much for listening in today. If anybody would like to stay on and just have a private word with Lorraine or Matthew or myself, and that would be fine, no problem with that. But keep safe, and thank you very much for today, for listening in.